Well, 75 years ago today, a North Fort Myers man was overseas waiting to go to war on Utah Beach. Now in his mid-90s, I sat down with him a couple of days ago to talk about the men he fought with, the people he helped liberate, and the mission that changed the course of world history. The pictures and stories inside this book are lessons that Robert Shelto hopes Americans never forget.
War is just terrible. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
At 94 years old, Robert remembers with remarkable clarity what he felt as a 19-year-old on D-Day.
Everything was aimed at the war.
Everybody knew what was at stake.
Yes, yeah. And they were all working for the war effort.
D-Day.
What we now know as the daring, heroic, and history-changing liberation of Europe from Nazi oppression was at the time anything but a sure thing. Robert graduated high school from a small town in Indiana exactly 1 year earlier, and from England he watched young men his age leave for a brutal fate on the beaches of France. He remembers feeling not fear, but a sense of adventure.
I was excited along with everyone else, and everyone was anxious to get involved.
Robert got his call along with other reinforcements a few weeks later. Sergeant Shelto worked security for engineers. When they needed to go in and fix or build new bridges, it was his job to make sure the area was free of Nazis.
The most dramatic thing that happened to me was I was riding in a truck loaded with explosives. It was a German plane that was just putting all his ammunition into our truck and put 5 bullets into the driver that was driving, and I'm sitting beside him. And so when the instrument panel started to explode, I could smell the tracer bullets, and I immediately jammed the door open and fell onto the highway and rolled out into the highway into a snowdrift. And that saved my life.
June 1944 was the beginning of one close call after another.
We were in a French barracks, and the Germans had been living in this French barracks, and they had moved out, but they booby-trapped all the stoves. And we went into the room, and before I could get into my room, the room next to me exploded. We traveled all the way across France and into Germany and eventually into Luxembourg.
And it was there he learned death was not the only consequence of war.
We built 2 10,000 displaced person centers for people that were wandering around the countryside, and the only thing they had were the clothing on their back and maybe a bag or a sack, and that's their worldly possessions, and there was just thousands of these people wandering along the countryside.
Robert's time in the war began just before D-Day and ended 2.5 years later. When he got home, he wrote this book about his service so his family would know the role he and his brothers played in saving the world.
It was a dramatic moment in history, and all the world was focused on that one event, the invasion of Europe. It was just our duty to go. We were willing to do this.
And we thank Robert and all the veterans who were there that day and all those days after. After the war, Robert lived in New York, and like a lot of people in Southwest Florida, he moved here when he retired. He got a chance to go back to Normandy 5 years ago for the 70th D-Day anniversary.